When you open your home to your family in their darkest hour, you expect a lifeline to be met with gratitude, or at the very least, basic human respect. But for Barbara, a widow from New Jersey, her profound act of unconditional love became a slow-moving tragedy that stripped away her dignity in her very own home. She sacrificed her personal space, drained her finances, and surrendered her peace to shield her daughter's family from the harsh realities of financial ruin. Yet instead of receiving thanks, she was treated like a burden, an obsolete relic to be mocked and dismissed. They confidently told her she was simply too old to understand how the modern world operated. They thought she was just a helpless, out-of-touch grandmother who existed only to fund their lives. What they didn't realize was that they were insulting the very architect of their comfort. And when Barbara finally decided she had had enough, she didn't scream or throw them out. Instead, she executed a plan so cold, precise, and unexpected that it would completely shatter their ungrateful reality in a matter of seconds. The story begins like many family tragedies do, with good intentions that pave the way to exploitation. Barbara was 67 years old and enjoying her early retirement in Trenton, New Jersey. She had been widowed for 8 years, living a quiet, peaceful life until her family hit a crisis. When her son-in-law, Derek, lost his job 2 years ago, her daughter, Alyssa, pleaded for help, promising the situation was only temporary. Wanting to do the right thing, Barbara opened her doors to Alyssa, Derek, and their 2 children. She couldn't bear the thought of her grandchildren bouncing between leases and enduring financial stress. Barbara didn't just open her door, she gave them everything. She warmly welcomed them, giving up her upstairs master bedroom and downsizing her own life to fit into the small guest room. She became the ultimate safety net. She paid for the roof over their heads, cooked their daily meals, and even co-signed their car loans. She handed over her credit card for emergencies and covered the costs of groceries, school supplies, and the house's Wi-Fi. For a while, she was the loving, present, and dependable grandmother. But slowly, her identity began to morph into something else entirely, a doormat. She gave with love, but soon that love became expected, and eventually it was demanded. The disrespect crept in quietly at first. It started with simple eye rolls whenever Barbara spoke. When she tried to offer advice, Derek would make passive-aggressive jokes, claiming she simply didn't understand technology or social media. Alyssa, her own daughter, began gatekeeping the grandchildren's schedules, treating Barbara less like a mother and more like hired help. The environment grew increasingly toxic. One afternoon, Barbara kindly offered to help her grandchildren with their math homework, which had always been her strong suit. Her 14-year-old grandson didn't even look appreciative. Instead, he looked up and bluntly stated, "Mom says you don't get how school works anymore. It's different now." The most heartbreaking part, her daughter Alyssa was standing right there and simply nodded in agreement. But the absolute worst offense, the catalyst for the storm that was about to hit, happened during family dinner. The topic of household budgeting came up, and Barbara gently asked Alyssa if she and Derek had looked for jobs recently. Rather than answering respectfully, Derek smirked. He looked at the woman funding his entire life and said, "You wouldn't get it. You're from a different era. The world moved on. You're too old to understand how anything works now." The room fell completely silent. But it wasn't a silence born of guilt or embarrassment. It was silent because that shocking level of disrespect had become entirely normal in her own home. Barbara didn't yell. She didn't cry. Instead, she laughed quietly to herself. They genuinely thought she was clueless. In their arrogance, they had completely forgotten who actually paid the bills that kept their lights on. More importantly, they had forgotten who wired the very system they relied on. Later that night, Barbara sat in the dark of her guest room, staring up at her wall. Hanging there were dusty, framed certificates representing a lifetime of brilliance. Microsoft, Cisco, CompTIA, and advanced cybersecurity certifications. Before retiring, Barbara hadn't just been an office worker. She was a senior systems analyst who designed network security protocols and trained people half her family's age. She was brilliant, yet she was being dismissed as an outdated relic. It was in that quiet, dark room that Barbara made a firm decision. She wasn't going to argue with them. She didn't need petty revenge. What she desperately needed was respect, and she knew exactly how she was going to earn it. She wouldn't raise her voice. Instead, she would initiate a quiet, surgical reset. The freeloaders had no idea what was coming, but Barbara was about to teach them the ultimate lesson in power, and it would all start with a single click. After that agonizing dinner, the air in the house hung heavy with unspoken entitlement. They had mocked her for being too old, carelessly biting the very hand that fed, sheltered, and funded their complacent lifestyles. But what her daughter Alyssa and her son-in-law Derek failed to realize was that they had deeply underestimated the matriarch of the family. Sitting alone in her guest room, surrounded by the physical proof of her lifelong brilliance, Barbara made a profound and life-altering decision. She decided that she was not going to argue with them. She was not going to raise her voice, beg for their basic gratitude, or fight for her rightful place in her own home. She simply didn't need petty revenge. What she needed, more than anything else, was their respect, and she was completely prepared to earn it back. The only way she knew how to achieve this was through a quiet, meticulously planned surgical reset of their entire reality. The grand orchestration of Barbara's awakening began the very next morning with the silent, devastating precision of a single click. The very first domino in her master plan to fall was the household Wi-Fi. Early that morning, long before the ungrateful household had even begun to stir, Barbara booted up her computer and effortlessly logged into the router settings. She used the exact same administrative credentials she had set up 2 long years ago. Because, of course, despite their snide jokes about her technological incompetence, she was the one who had actually installed the entire digital system for the house. In their absolute laziness, Derek and Alyssa had never even bothered to change a single thing about the network. They foolishly assumed she simply didn't know how. With a few expert keystrokes, Barbara created a brand new secondary network strictly for herself. She ensured it was heavily password protected and configured it with restricted visibility so they couldn't even see it existed. Then, with a satisfied breath, she completely disabled the primary network. Just like that, the digital lifeblood of the freeloaders was severed. Suddenly, there was no more binge-watching Netflix, no more mindlessly scrolling through TikTok, no more draining hours on online games, no more streaming podcasts, and certainly no remote job hunting. The house was immediately plunged into absolute digital silence. The fallout was spectacularly instantaneous. At exactly 7:13 a.m., the peace was broken when Derek yelled from upstairs in a panic, "Babe, is the Wi-Fi down again?" Without skipping a beat, Alyssa instantly placed the blame on the woman funding her life, yelling out, "Mom, did you forget to pay the bill again?" Hearing the sheer audacity of the word "again," Barbara simply made herself a fresh cup of coffee and calmly stepped out to sit on the porch. It was a beautiful morning for a reality check. Barbara sat in the crisp air, sipping her coffee, and watched the magnificent chaos unfold through the window. Inside, the family was scrambling like ants under a magnifying glass. Derek frantically restarted the modem, completely oblivious to the fact that the hardware wasn't the issue. Alyssa hopelessly unplugged and plugged the router back in. The panic quickly trickled down to the younger generation. Her grandson, Liam, was pacing back and forth across the floor like a trapped animal because he had an important online test to take. Meanwhile, her granddaughter, Kayla, was stuck halfway through editing a trendy dance video for her social media followers. Their entire modern worlds were rapidly crumbling right before their eyes over something they had smugly assumed Barbara couldn't possibly understand. Unable to fix the sudden dark age they found themselves in, Alyssa stormed outside onto the porch. Frustration painted all over her face, she complained, "Mom, seriously, the Wi-Fi is out again. Can you call support?" Barbara took a slow, deliberate sip of her hot coffee. "Already did," she lied smoothly. Leaning into the naive, elderly persona they had assigned her, she offered a perfectly innocent explanation. "Must be an outage. Maybe it's the old wires in the house," she said, flashing her daughter a sweet, knowing smile. But taking away the internet was merely the opening act of Barbara's symphony of tough love. The second, Much sharper strike came shortly after, when Derek desperately tried to use the credit card Barbara had generously added his name to 2 years ago. Back then, she had given him access so he could rent a car for job interviews. But as he stood at the gas station, the machine beeped with a harsh rejection. The card was declined. Alyssa soon discovered the exact same horrifying reality. Her card was declined, too. Behind the scenes, Barbara had ruthlessly removed them both as authorized users on all her accounts and systematically reset all of the passwords. By mid-morning, the financial freeze had caused total chaos to bloom throughout the home like untamed weeds. Without Barbara's open wallet, their luxurious, effortless lifestyle instantly evaporated. Suddenly, there were no expensive Uber Eats deliveries arriving at the door, no impulsive Amazon orders showing up on the porch, and no convenient grocery deliveries to stock the fridge. But Barbara wasn't finished teaching her lesson. At noon, she took aim at their entertainment. She logged into her accounts and permanently deleted the shared Spotify family plan that the family used on a daily basis. She then ruthlessly canceled the Hulu account and wiped out the shared Netflix profile they relied on so heavily. In a stroke of absolute, unapologetic petty justice, before shutting it all down, she renamed the Netflix profile to a simple, clear directive: find a job. And through all of this magnificent destruction, she maintained her absolute silence, saying absolutely nothing. The tension reached its breaking point that evening. Alyssa marched into the kitchen from the hallway, her arms crossed defensively across her chest. Her tone was accusing as she demanded, "Did you change something with the cards?" She revealed that Derek had called, humiliated that his card got declined at the gas station. This was the moment Barbara had been waiting for. She looked at her daughter and blinked innocently, wearing the perfect mask of a confused elder. "I figured since you both said I didn't understand how the world works anymore, you wouldn't need my accounts," she replied smoothly, turning their own disrespectful words right back against them. Alyssa instantly froze. The sheer gravity of what was happening finally hit her, and a visible flicker of pure panic quickly crossed her face. Desperate, she tried to use her children as leverage. "But Kayla has a project due tomorrow. She needs the internet," Alyssa pleaded. Barbara didn't flinch. She simply turned and began walking away, delivering the final, devastating blow of the evening over her shoulder. "I'm sure you can figure it out," she said. "You're young, adaptable, unlike me." For the next 2 painfully long days, the house was submerged in a thick, uncomfortable silence. The adults absolutely refused to speak to her. The only communication came from the grandchildren, who were quickly learning the value of humility. Kayla quietly approached Barbara and politely asked if she could print her homework. Later, Liam gently knocked on her door to borrow her cellular hotspot so he could complete his test, and for the first time in a long time, he even made sure to say, "Please." While the grandchildren were beginning to understand respect, Alyssa and Derek dug their heels in. They stomped around the house and acted as if Barbara had committed an act of war against them. They were still stubbornly trying to troubleshoot their way through the absolute tech hell Barbara had plunged them into when she decided it was time to deploy her third, much quieter move. She sat down at her computer and printed out a comprehensive, detailed copy of all the household expenses. The paper listed everything: the mortgage that was still entirely in her name, the utilities, the streaming services, the Wi-Fi, the phone plans, the groceries, the insurance, absolutely everything that kept them afloat. With a bright marker, she meticulously highlighted every single line item that Derek and Alyssa directly benefited from. Then, to make her point crystal clear, she took a pen and boldly underlined the specific bills she was completely cutting off the following week if their attitudes and circumstances didn't drastically change. Walking down the silent hallway, Barbara approached their bedroom. With the cool, calm demeanor of a woman who had finally reclaimed her power, she slid the highlighted folder underneath their bedroom door. It sat there on their floor, a glaring, undeniable eviction notice of truth. The blackout was complete, the financial tap was dry, and the reality check had been successfully delivered. Now, the ball was entirely in their court. The night Barbara slid that highlighted folder of financial reality under their bedroom door, the entire atmosphere of the house shifted from stubborn defiance to crushing realization. Lying in her own quiet room, Barbara could hear the muffled sounds of Alyssa crying in the bathroom. For a brief, fleeting second, the mother in Barbara almost felt bad about the severe emotional toll her digital and financial strike was taking. But then, she vividly remembered the disrespect. She remembered the way her daughter had so callously rolled her eyes at dinner. She remembered the way Derek had arrogantly dismissed her like she was nothing more than a fossil with absolutely no value. This wasn't about being petty, and she certainly wasn't trying to be cruel. She was simply reminding them exactly who held the foundation of this house together, and she was doing it not through malicious control, but through undeniable competence. It finally happened on a gloomy, rainy Tuesday. It had been 3 full days since Barbara had completely shut the system down. 3 days of no emergency credit cards, no high-speed Wi-Fi, and no convenient grocery apps, just real, unfiltered life inconveniences. It was reality completely unplugged. Barbara was standing in the warmth of the kitchen, carefully making a rich beef and barley stew. It was the kind of hearty, traditional meal that needs to simmer low and slow, filling the cold air of the house with a comforting scent that felt something like warmth. As she wiped her hands on a towel, she heard a hesitant knock. It wasn't on the hallway wall, and it wasn't on the stairs. It was directly on her bedroom door. When she opened the door, she saw her daughter standing there. It was the exact same girl who used to play with Legos on the living room floor, the little girl who used to hold her mother's hand when she was terrified of the dark. But now she was a grown woman standing there in yoga pants, her hair thrown up in a messy bun, with the heavy weight of stress painted across her tired face like war paint. Alyssa's voice was incredibly soft when she finally asked, "Mom, can we talk?" Behind her hovered Derek, looking exactly like a guilty teenager who had just been caught sneaking back into the house after curfew. Barbara calmly stepped aside and invited them in. They awkwardly sat on the very edge of her bed, looking less like family members and more like cautious guests. Barbara could see a swirl of intense emotions in their eyes, uncertainty, heavy guilt, and perhaps even deep shame, but it was clear they had absolutely no idea how to begin the conversation. So, Barbara did it for them. "I take it the outage lasted longer than expected," she noted dryly. Derek nervously rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, we just didn't realize how much we were leaning on you," he stammered out. Barbara raised a skeptical eyebrow at his poor choice of words. Didn't realize or didn't care? She challenged. Alyssa visibly winced at the undeniable truth of the statement. "Okay, we deserve that," Alyssa admitted softly. She took a deep breath, her voice cracking with emotion as she pushed through her pride. "You're right about everything. We were ungrateful," Alyssa confessed, the tears welling up. "I let myself believe you were old-fashioned because it was easier than admitting how much we needed you, how much we rely on you." Barbara stayed completely silent. She let her daughter fill the empty space. She let the raw truth echo off the walls of the room. Alyssa continued to pour her heart out, admitting that they weren't actively trying to be cruel, but they had simply become way too comfortable. "And I let Derek make jokes at your expense," Alyssa sobbed, finally taking accountability. "I let the kids talk back. I didn't correct them. I didn't respect you, not like I should have." Barbara watched her daughter intently. She wasn't holding on to anger anymore, she was just incredibly tired. She was tired of constantly giving and being completely invisible, tired of being so useful to everyone but never genuinely valued. Derek cleared his throat, finally stepping up to face the music. "You've done a lot for us. We know that now," he admitted, his usual smirking arrogance completely erased. "And I think we got a little too used to you being the fallback. We should have stepped up." Barbara looked him dead in the eyes, her expression unwavering. "You still can," she replied. That was the exact moment she handed them a brand new second folder. This folder wasn't an eviction notice, it was a blueprint for their redemption. Inside the folder, Barbara had meticulously printed out a comprehensive 3-month action plan. The packet included blank job applications, detailed budget sheets, and a curated list of free resources available right there in Trenton for employment and career training. She had even included printouts for 2 open IT support roles from her old company, both entry-level positions that were absolutely perfect for someone in Derek's situation. "I'm not kicking you out," Barbara told them firmly. "Not yet, but this house, it doesn't run on apologies. It runs on effort." She made it crystal clear that if they were going to continue living under her roof, they needed to actually contribute. They nodded slowly and honestly, finally understanding the gravity of the situation. But Barbara couldn't resist one last, sharp warning. "If I hear you're too old to understand ever again, I'll shut down more than the Wi-Fi," she added deadpan. For the first time in a long time, Derek laughed genuinely, and Alyssa let out a massive breath of relief that she had seemingly been holding for weeks. That night, the dynamic in the household fundamentally shifted. They all sat down and ate the rich beef and barley stew together. There were absolutely no cell phones at the table, no background television shows playing, just a dining table full of warm steam, freshly cracked biscuits, and the very fragile, beautiful beginnings of earned respect. The next morning, Barbara proved that she was entirely done holding their hands. She woke up and brewed 2 separate pots of coffee, one for herself and one for them. She didn't call anyone down to breakfast. She didn't remind Alyssa about the important appointment she had scheduled at the workforce center, and she completely refrained from checking if Derek had followed up on the job leads she had provided. If they truly wanted independence, she was going to let them see exactly what it looked like without the training wheels on. Instead of worrying about them, Barbara sat at her own desk, logged into her private, restricted Wi-Fi network, and peacefully opened her emails. For the first time in months, she genuinely smiled as she read a message from a retired colleague offering her some part-time consulting work. Around 10 in the morning, she heard the sound of hustled, energetic footsteps upstairs, not the lazy shuffling she had grown used to. Alyssa came rushing downstairs, properly dressed in nice jeans, a crisp blouse, and with her hair combed neatly. She announced she was heading to the Trenton Career Resource Center. Half an hour later, Derek came down looking sharp in khakis and a polo shirt, holding a resume folder securely in his hand. He told Barbara he was going downtown to a walk-in interview for one of the IT support jobs she had found for him. "Don't forget to mention you managed our household tech for 2 years, Barbara told him playfully. When Derek blinked and stammered that he hadn't really done that, Barbara didn't miss a beat. "You did now," she replied smoothly. "Sell it." Derek smirked, replying, "Yes, ma'am," before heading out the door. Fast forward a few weeks, and the incredible transformation of the household was undeniable. The tension had completely melted away, replaced by a deep, mutual appreciation. One late Friday night, long after the grandkids had gone to bed, Alyssa and Derek kindly asked Barbara if she would join them outside on the back porch. It had been a long, exhausting week, but she agreed. When she walked out, she found they had set up a small bottle of wine, 3 glasses, and a warm blanket waiting for her. As she sat down, entirely unsure of what to expect, Alyssa gently handed her a wrapped box. "We know this doesn't even come close to what we owe you, but we wanted you to have it," Alyssa said sincerely. Barbara carefully unwrapped the box to find a beautiful, custom-made plaque resting inside. She traced her fingers over the engraved letters. It read, "To the woman who wired this home with love, discipline, and brilliance. You didn't just build systems, you built us." For the first time in a very long time, the brilliant systems analyst couldn't even find the words to speak. Her throat caught tightly as the profound acknowledgement hit her far deeper than any simple apology ever could. Derek looked over at her with immense admiration. "You didn't just teach us how to survive without Wi-Fi," he said quietly. "You taught us how to plug back into real life." In that beautiful, quiet moment under the night sky, Barbara knew she had accomplished exactly what she set out to do. She hadn't just won a power play. She had completely restored the dignity of her family. Spring eventually crept into New Jersey, bringing with it warm rain, late blooms, and something Barbara hadn't felt in a long time, real, irreversible clarity. The dynamic in the house had shifted beautifully, but Barbara knew that temporary fixes wouldn't secure her family's long-term future. One quiet afternoon, she sat alone at her kitchen table, purposefully updating her will. She wasn't doing this out of bitterness. She was doing it because she was finally awake. For far too long, she had lived her life on default mode, constantly serving, supporting, and sacrificing her own peace for their comfort. But now that a healthy balance had finally returned to the household, she knew it was time to take things one crucial step further. She called a formal meeting with just Alyssa and Derek. As they sat across from her, looking understandably nervous, there was no Wi-Fi crisis or declined credit cards hanging over their heads. Instead, Barbara held a plain folder containing words she had practiced for weeks. She calmly announced that she had decided to restructure how the house operated financially and legally. She explained that she had spoken with an attorney and was officially putting the house into a trust. This wasn't a standard inheritance. The home could only be inherited under very specific conditions. When Derek cautiously asked what those conditions were, Barbara laid out the ultimate boundary. To inherit the home, they both had to be consistently employed for 5 solid years. Additionally, the kids had to graduate, and there could be absolutely no debts tied to Barbara's name. Leaning in to emphasize her most important point, she declared that the home must never again become a place of freeloading. This applied not just to Alyssa and Derek, but to their kids and their future spouses. The house was built on sweat, not laziness, and the new trust was designed to strictly enforce that reality. She made it clear she wasn't doing this to punish them. She was doing it to protect what she had spent her entire lifetime building. If they wanted to pass the house down, they had to prove they were capable of upholding it. The room fell silent, but this time, it was a silence filled with profound respect as the generational shift finally settled. Derek looked at her and genuinely said, "I respect that." Alyssa slowly nodded, admitting she wasn't upset at all. She finally understood that Barbara wasn't just preparing for a time when she would be gone. She was actively preparing them for the day they would have to stand entirely on their own 2 feet. From that weekend on, the house truly became a shared responsibility. They painted the garage together, Kayla helped patch drywall, and Liam took over mowing the yard. They even created a chore chart, not for Barbara, but for themselves. The house felt like a true home again because it finally had rules, boundaries, and above all, respect. Barbara's story of quiet empowerment didn't end within the walls of her home. The very day her legal documents were finalized, she received a special phone call from the local community center. They asked if she would be willing to speak to a group of older women about personal empowerment and technological independence. Barbara agreed without a single moment of hesitation. Weeks later, she stood at a podium, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun and her glasses perched on her nose, letting her steady voice echo through the crowded room. She told them her entire story, the Wi-Fi blackout, the declined cards, the beautiful plaque, and the exact moment she stopped letting her unconditional love be used as a leash. She closed her speech with a powerful realization. She told the crowd that her family had called her too old to understand. But what they completely failed to understand was that she had built the very systems they abused. And when that system broke down, she didn't throw a fit or rage, she simply rebooted it. As the entire room rose to their feet in a tearful, smiling standing ovation, Barbara proved her ultimate point. Being older absolutely does not mean being obsolete. It means you have survived enough storms to know exactly when to raise the protective shutters, and exactly when to step back and let the rain wash everything clean. So, what can we take away from Barbara's incredible story? The lesson here is profound and twofold. First, never mistake kindness for weakness, and never underestimate the quiet generation. The elders in our lives didn't just survive the world we live in today, they built the technological and societal foundations of it. Respecting the hands that fed us and the minds that paved our way isn't just good manners. It is an absolute requirement for our own maturity. Second, for anyone out there who feels like they are being used as a doormat by the people they love the most, True love does not require you to sacrifice your dignity or fund someone else's complacency. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your family, and for yourself, is to let them fall so they can finally learn how to stand back up. Boundaries are not a form of cruelty, they are the architecture of respect. So, if you ever find yourself taken for granted in your own home, remember Barbara. Don't waste your energy screaming into the void. Just find the router, change the password, and initiate your own quiet reset.